Hello. Can you hear that? Yeah. Oh, well done. That's excellent. That is a good start. So, there are many downsides to playing the viola, as you well know. And can you imagine being an Irish viola player? Then you're really in trouble. My Irish viola player joke is, did you hear the one about the Irish viola player? Joined the Brodsky Quartet. Oh. However, one plus point I can tell you, are there any viola players? Yeah, 2 at least, that's great. So one thing we have in our favor is that we are able to pilfer the 6 solo sonatas and partitas for violin and the 6 cello suites. We can kind of enjoy both these amazing sets of works, as I have done for many, many, many years. Almost every day, you know, like Casals said, a day without Bach is a day, you know, less worthy than had Bach been involved. And I kind of feel like that myself. It feels, there is something extraordinary about every single day being able to lose yourself in these extraordinary pieces. So over the years, they are quite tricky though. And over the years, I've thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing to make them available to play in our quartet? Because as of course quartets really began with Haydn, there are 1 or 2 like the Purcell, Chacon and these sort of pieces, but very, very, very few. And of course we all adore that music from the time of Bach. This is amazing music to be able to play, particularly on strings. You can happily use an open sound and just enjoy the whole kind of the instrument seems to react in such a natural way. So I was desperate to try and do that, but of course I was somewhat reticent about trying to compose 60 minutes of Bach. So, but anyway, nearly 2 years ago in March, we were in Holland. We were about to play in Utrecht. It was 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And we were just having a little sandwich before the rehearsal and the concert, and the promoter came across to us, a promoter who we've known for many, many years. So we thought, oh, there's Peter, hello, Peter. And Peter had a very long face, and we thought, what's wrong? And of course, he had just come from watching on the TV the Dutch Prime Minister saying, Holland is closed, like now. So not the way it sometimes happens here. We must close the country, but it'll be next Thursday evening. So do have fun between now and then. This was right then, that very moment. Anyway, so we've all been through this. It was an extraordinary moment. And when you realize that things are not about to kick in a week later or 2 weeks later, and when your entire future just, in terms of work, just disappears. It's a fascinating moment. And so I thought, well, I will go crazy, that's for sure. So I need to do something. And suddenly thought, well, this could be the moment to try and do this thing. So I decided to just do the 3 sonatas, because in a way they have, there's more going on in there. I mean, the partitas could be done, but in fact, of course they could be done, but somehow the sonatas seemed to stand out. And that's what I did. And actually, I brought, I don't know, does anybody want to see that? This is the score of what we'll be playing. If anyone's interested, you can have a look and see how it's been changed. Because A friend of mine phoned me. I think a lot of people thought that I would just give the first violin the entire line and the rest of us would be sort of chugging along. But it's not at all like that. And it was an amazing thing to try and play with the kind of dialogue that's constant through these pieces and created across the quartet. But my goodness me, I tell you, it was unbelievably challenging, I have to say, and it took many months. And it's not just a case of trying to find the harmony, but much more than that was the juxtaposition of the harmony, what chord, how that chord was divided up underneath. That was really, really tough. So you might know that you have the right chord, but it never sounded right. And then if you just took the fifth and put it on the bottom, it's like, right. And of course, it's very difficult when you've got two violinists standing next to you who play these pieces all the time and have lived and loved them their entire lives, because of course, well, not every, but many places can be treated differently. Different harmonies. You see a different structure. So, the structure that I saw, which maybe agrandisse like this, Ian might have thought, why are you doing that? Surely that's the most intimate moment in the... so it's a bit of a nightmare, and it's very nice of these two lovely people to kind of go with what I came up with, because of course the arrangement demands that it's played in a certain way. But one thing I wanted to say very briefly is that today is quite an auspicious day for the quartet, because a certain woman, Francine Philippard was her name, would today have been 100 years old. And she was Jackie's mom. And in a way, gave birth to 50% of the group. Because the original group, which was Ian and Jackie, Alex Robertson was his name on viola, and Jackie's brother, Michael, played violin. So, I mean, I haven't... I know they will agree with me. We should definitely dedicate this concert to her memory, because she was an amazing woman, and yeah.
How does this work? I'm not sure. Is it on? Oh, I was just going to add that she would have been with us. We only lost her a few months ago, so it's a real shame. She didn't make it to 100, but she didn't want to, so that's okay. So, Shostakovich?
Shostakovich. I'm going to talk about the Shostakovich Quartet, number 8. How many of you have heard it live in concert? Oh. It is the famous Shostakovich Quartet. I'm sure it's played much more than any of the others, because because it's so vivid and so clear. And we enjoy playing, I think, all the 15 Shostakovich quartets, and all of them are entirely different. And people who don't know the Shostakovich quartets sometimes say, but do you really want to play all of them, because they all sound so similar? But one could say the same about Haydn or Beethoven. If you don't really kind of start exploring them, the sound world is similar for sure, and the harmonic language is similar, but each quartet carries its own sort of universe with it. But number 8 is maybe the most accessible, partly because it has a storyline. And this is that Shostakovich in 1960, Stalin was already dead by then, and Shostakovich had suffered greatly under Stalin's regime, and his music was banned, and he was very much in fear of his life a lot of the time, and he always kept a suitcase packed by his bed in case he was taken to prison in the night, and he was always worried for his family. He had to tread this incredible tightrope of trying to keep Stalin's regime happy with his music. That meant that he was supposed to write uplifting, optimistic music. He did not feel that way, and he had to find a way to compromise. His symphonies are much more public works, but in the quartets, it's as if he bears his private soul to whoever is going to play or listen. And he was in a particular situation in 1960. Khrushchev had taken over as the ruler of the Soviet Union, and Shostakovich had been asked to write some film music to accompany a film that was just being made about the bombing of Dresden. And he was sent to Dresden to start writing the music. And he found himself writing something completely different. He found himself writing a quartet. And this was the 8th quartet. And I'm going to read to you from a letter that he wrote about this. They placed me very well in Dresden, hoping to put me into a creative mood. The creative conditions resulted in the composition of the 8th quartet. No matter how I tried to make a draft of the film scores, I couldn't do it. Instead, I've written this ideologically flawed quartet, because some of his quartets were actually banned because they weren't cheerful enough. It's really true, they weren't allowed to be played. But nonetheless, I've written this ideologically flawed quartet, which nobody will be interested in. I had been musing that if I die someday, this is Shostakovich's humour, he had such a wonderful dark sense of humour. If I die someday, I don't think anyone would write a work dedicated to my memory. So I decided to write one myself. Dedicated to the memory of the composer of this quartet, could be written on the title page. Then he explains, I'll paraphrase a little bit, he explains that the first 4 notes that you hear in the quartet, D, E flat, C, B, you'll hear that everywhere in every movement. They are the initials of the opening, the first part of his surname, D, Dmitri, S, the word, the note E flat is pronounced S, so S for Shostakovich, and then C, Shostakovich, and then H, which is the note B. So that's a kind of emblem of his name, and you'll hear it slowly, you'll hear it fast, you'll hear it in every sort of guise during the quartet. He also explains that he quotes from his other works because it's a summing up. So he says, for example, oh, and I forgot the 10th Symphony, I quote from that as well. The Piano Concerto, etc., etc., Lady Macbeth, his opera. Altogether, he says, quite a mishmash. The pseudo-tragic essence of this quartet was such that, composing it, I shed as many tears as the amount of urine produced after half a dozen beers. When I got home, so when he got home to Russia, I twice tried to play it through and again shed tears, not only because of its tragic essence, but also because I was surprised by the beautiful integrity of its form. This was perhaps influenced by a certain element of self-admiration, which will probably soon pass, to be replaced by the usual hangover of self-criticism. And then there's another kind of backstory to this, which is written by his son in this wonderful little book, Shostakovich's Letters to His Family. So what actually happened to make Shostakovich feel that actually he wanted to die, and his family had to kind of cajole him not to leave them at this point, was that when Khrushchev had taken over, they decided to make Shostakovich the chairman of the Soviet Composers Union. And to do that, he had to be seen to be a member of the Communist Party. Although he'd just about managed to keep on the right side of Stalin, he had always steadfastly refused to join the Communist Party. That was his last kind of stand, that he was never going to do that. But on this occasion, they wore him down and wore him down and wore him down, and in the end, he just gave in and joined the party and had to read a speech that had been composed to him in front of the whole union of Soviet composers, kind of pretty much sort of justifying everything that was going on at the moment. And so he was found by his family in a state of complete paralysis and sobbing and desperate. And this quartet was his way of expressing what he felt. He was even made to change the title, because originally he dedicated it to the memory of himself. But then he was made to change that and dedicated it to the memory of the victims of fascism. But of course, fascism can equally mean totalitarianism, so that was his way of dedicating it to the victims of the totalitarian regime that he was under. So just very briefly, the movements of the quartet, it's a fairly concise work. It begins with a fugue based on the initials of Shostakovich's name, a slow fugue, which is very reminiscent of Beethoven's Opus 131 quartet, which begins with a slow fugue. And then the same motif suddenly erupts into a hysterical outburst of quick notes, and then a terrifying, it's too fast to be called a march, but a kind of obsessive movement follows. And there he quotes from his piano trio, which contains a klezmer theme. So again, the extermination of the Jewish people, which is the kind of climax of that movement. Then there's a very ironic, desperate little waltz movement, followed by, my mind is blank, Ian, help me out.
The adagio,
yes.
with a beautiful cello solo, and that's from
Lady Macbeth.
Lady Macbeth. I don't think this is working.
Yes.
It is working.
Yeah.
Wow. And then to finish, it returns to the same theme that you heard at the beginning in the first movement, with an absolutely tragic yet amazing conclusion, and dies off into the distance. It's absolutely one of the most powerful string quartets that we play. And it's amazing when you think that composers, I'm going to include Paul in this as well, you think that someone like Schubert or Mozart or Haydn just had these tunes going around in their head and they just wrote them down and got on to the next piece, and that's what we think. But the amount of incredible detail that's in every score that we look at, which it makes our life fascinating as musicians, because we can revisit the same piece 20, 30, dare I even say 50, many years later, and find something new that we hadn't noticed, because they didn't just write it, they told you how to play every note, and we can discuss it till late in the evening every time we have a rehearsal. And Paul's doing his arrangements of the Bach has done exactly the same thing, put so much care in the detail so that we know exactly how he was imagining it, because notes are just a guide, they're just telling you where to put your finger. Everything else tells you how to play the instrument, and that's really important. Shostakovich was no exception for that.
Mm-hmm. So Schubert, also no exception. His greatest, best known chamber work probably, maybe the Trout, but this cello quintet is one of the most loved pieces in the universe of people who adore classical music. It was written 2 months before he died, and he actually never heard it performed in public. We're not sure he heard it at all, but the first public performance happened 22 years later. So it gives you an idea of what was going on at the time. There wasn't so much focus on these composers all of the time, and yet here we are 200 years later with a piece that almost nobody could say they haven't heard it at one point in their life. Obviously the joy for us is that we get to have Laura along as second cellist. And
the pleasure's all mine.
Oh, well, I mean, the textures of the quintet are amazing, aren't they? Because having two cellos he plays a lot with us, taking it in turns to be the bass line and to be the meat of the work. But it also sometimes links me with the inner parts, and we form a trio. Sometimes I'm playing with the first violin, sometimes Laura's playing with the first violin, and we have all these games going on within the work. But it's something as Ian said, we've all been working on it for decades, and we could go on and on because it's so much full of ideas and full of things to discover always. How do you find it, Laura?
I love playing it. I love playing it with you guys. And as Ian was saying about finding so much in every note, we played it together quite a lot. And every time, every rehearsal, there's more that we find in the piece. And I'm sure that you've played it a lot without me as well. I hate to think about it. But there's just so much in the music that keeps being found. And yeah.
What's actually lovely is I realised the other day that you may notice there's an age difference between us. But Laura is just about exactly the same age as I was when we first played it with our teacher, who was the age we all are now. So that was Terence Vile, who's a brilliant cellist of past days. He was with the Melos Ensemble and the Pro Arte Quartet, and the Schubert was his absolute favourite work. In his later days, he got quite a bad bow shake because he was a bit dependent on alcohol. So he was, it was quite difficult. He got very nervous, and so that they were our first memories of sort of keeping him together. Now it's completely different. We're fine. We're not.
Now they're all dependent on alcohol, and I'm trying to keep it together.
But Laura's amazing to play with. She's got such a beautiful sound, and she seems to blend with us with such ease.
And I'd just like to add to that I often reflect upon the fact that music is possibly the only profession where age is meaningless, because even if you're if you're a sort of employee or some sort of, then there is kind of age and seniority and so on, and there can be that in music as well, but it's also completely possible and absolutely delightful to interact on a completely equal level with people of vastly different ages. And you could say that about the theatre, but even an actor has to more or less act the age of the person that they're representing. And then you could say that a creative artist, it doesn't matter what age they are, but they mostly work alone. So music is a wonderful collaborative thing that can be shared between generations with, each, I think, inspiring the other. Hope you agree.
No. Yeah, I do. Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's just really great playing with you guys.
Well, I mean, about the piece, it's in 4 movements. That's quite a standard set of sonata form first movement, but its scope is huge, so it alone takes a good 12 minutes, maybe even more like 15. And then comes within it astonishing themes, which we'll all be singing for the rest of the night, I'm sure. Then the slow movement, which is the sort of core of the piece, and is probably lots of people's desert island disc, with this absolutely incredible trio within the center of the group, played by second violin, viola, and first cello. We play a kind of sustained trio, while the other 2 have a conversation with pizzicato and a kind of descant obbligato, but little, just interjections, not really a theme at all. And then this incredibly torrid central section where the fight changes and these three become a unit, and they are the motoring force of the central section, whilst we play a sort of searing and passionate melody above. But the whole thing is kind of bubbling along in a really almost frightening way till it subsides, suddenly stopping and then returning to the original music with just a bit more flow within the outer voices. So there's this, the conversation continues, but with little scales bubbling up through the texture. Absolutely astonishing. Then A scherzo. Anyone want to talk about the scherzo?
Oh, no, not really. No, there's a scherzo, and then there's a last movement, which is kind of very dancey.
But the march.
Go on then.
Okay. Okay, the third movement of the Schubert is this incredibly vigorous movement in C major, which can immediately be sort of understood as a kind of raucous, flamboyant hunting song or dance or whatever, with horns and tambourines and baying hounds and all that kind of thing. And in the Romantic period, and particularly in German culture, hunting also had a kind of symbolic attachment to the idea of death, but also overcoming grief. And in the trio, which is perhaps the most extraordinary, in the middle section of the scherzo, we get a funeral march instead of the normal kind of gentle little tune that might come, in the middle of a scherzo. We get a very serious section which quotes directly from the slow movement of Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, which is itself a funeral march. So it's really not what you expect in the middle of the scherzo, but it's very much sort of the other side of the coin from the hunt. And then we find ourselves possibly somewhere between Vienna and Budapest.
Yeah, the last movement is quite astounding because it's sort of Hungarian and it's got a lot of flipped notes to it. Ba-dum, like you're playing a gypsy violin or a Romani traveller or something like that. But the amazing thing, and I think Schubert got this right, is when you do a quintet, you don't get another viola player. That just fills out the middle. You get some instrument that actually adds a breadth to the instrument that you've got there. You get two cellos, and then you've got the possibility, which you'll hear in the last movement, and in the first movement, a cello duet, which is just something, you never get that, because if Jackie's playing a solo when we're doing a quartet, one of us is trying to match her sound and perhaps play the other part while she has the melody. They can swap around and play a duet on, and we can just take a back seat and listen to this gorgeous sound, because whenever I finish a concert, people will come up and say, oh, hopefully, I really like the concert. What's your favorite instrument? And I'm holding my violin case. And before I open my mouth, they say, mine's the cello. I love the cello. And it's just every day of my life. Every day. When you listen to a piece like this, and when you hear these two play these lovely solos and duets, I think it's almost convincing me that I've picked up the wrong instrument. But I hope you enjoy it.
We are about to actually record this piece. So there are probably only about 10,000 recordings already. But as soon as we met Laura and worked together and performed together, we just thought, gosh, this has got to be the moment, because she brings so much to the table. But there, just a couple of tiny things. I know this piece from a particular recording, which inevitably was Casals, and Stern was the fiddle player. You would never know who else was playing, because on the cover of the LP was Casals, so the Schubert Quintet. But anyway, so Laura will be on the front of our CD, and maybe not with the pipe.
We'll definitely sell more.
We will
CDs.
sell more. So, but it's extraordinary, because as the piece goes along, I can't get it out of my mind. Same with the Brahms Sextet and so many other recordings of his. As the piece goes along, it gets to a certain point, and I just hear, because Casals used to, when he got emotional, he just made noises, and so, often when other people had the tune. No, but these noises just stay with you, and I can tell you right now where they are. But one rather incredible thing, I believe, we grew up, or maybe not Laura, but certainly us, we grew up playing all this amazing music, Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, Schubert, all, Mendelssohn, everything, from editions, right? So Peter's edition, for example. Now, what I always say, can you imagine going into a shop and buying a copy of Macbeth, edited by Anthony or what's he called? And he edited by an actor. I mean, it's unbelievable. But that is what musicians did for a long, long time. So we were dealing with parts that were heavily edited by a musician.
Explain what you mean, with the wrong dynamics.
Well, they would just decide things. Oh, that should be, that's just like the bit before. So not following the express wishes of the composer, just making an addition. And that's what we had for right up until the 80s or 90s. We had to relearn all the Beethoven quartets. Well, I mean, but what I wanted to say was the very last note of this piece. So it's like 55 minutes, this piece, right? And when you get to the end of it, there is a thing in Schubert that when he writes this, it's like this. People are undecided as to whether he meant accent or diminuendo. So either it's a note that is dying away, or it's a note that has an accent. Like so, and to this day, actually, you can argue about it because it's not completely clear. But the last note of this piece has one of these on it. So right up until, well, certainly all the old recordings that I ever heard, and when we used to play this piece back in the 70s and 80s, we always played what everyone played. So it goes dum, dum, da, da. That's what we always did. And then suddenly, the new editions appeared, which of course followed the composer's marks exactly. And on this last note, it seemed very, very obvious that it wasn't that at all. It was yada. And so suddenly, like almost overnight, the end of this piece completely changed.
Which is actually the way everyone really wanted to play
and
it
now,
anyway.
I don't know, I think most people do that now. We're going to do that tonight, right? Yeah. But it's just interesting how, yeah. Thank you.
I think we need to finish.
Yep, we need to go and get changed.
Get ready for the concert.
Just before we go, we all had a very inspiring teacher in common, Chandos Records, great Hungarian musician. And I'm just going to leave on the front of the stage some leaflets because every January a group of musicians who studied with Weig, not us, but a different group who meet in Cornwall every year, they give an annual memorial concert in memory of Chandos Records. And this year they'll be playing in Bath, not a million miles away from here, playing Mozart and Bruckner string quintets. So because you're not far away from Bath, if you're interested in hearing some other wonderful music, I'll just leave this on the front and please help yourselves. Thank you very much.